Hello everyone. Welcome to Advanced Integration Logic. I am just gonna talk really slow here for a moment or two as we give everyone a chance to join in and get set up. I hope everybody has been having a wonderful FormFest so far. I will say, I know we have a lot of interesting and exciting topics going around, flying around with a couple different tracks. So more than anything, I hope you're learning something new and hope you're getting from this experience what you want. So come on in, join us. A little bit of just very quick housekeeping. If you've been in some of these already, you know, we do have a Q&A, which is where we'll be taking questions from, especially towards the end. But at any point, if you have questions, please feel free to throw them into the Q&A box so that we can ensure we get your questions answered. We're happy to do that. All right. Okay, it is a busy day, so while I said I'm going to give a little bit of time, I don't want to give too much time because we all have a lot of cool things to learn today and a lot of cool things to do. So again, thank you all for being here at Advanced Integration Logic. We are really excited about FormFest this year. Love the rapid fire nature of it and hope you are too. We have a lot of great things to talk about today, a lot of features that I think you're really going to love. So we will go ahead and get started and dive right in. I want to go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Melanie Hypes. I am the Director of Technical Support Services here at FormAssembly. So if you've ever run into trouble with the product, with something you're trying to do, and you've reached out to support, that is my team that you're working with. We are happy to help you guys. I know this is a more experienced crew, so we've probably seen you around the block a couple times, and we're always happy to help. And I have to just throw it out there. Yes, we are working on that little bit of backlog we see right now, but I promise we are driving it down and we will get back to you as soon as we can. It's really such a joy to see so many people familiar names. And with that, I'm going to turn it over. I am usually behind the scenes, but I got totally scored with my co-presenter today. So I am so excited to introduce Joelle. She is very accustomed to these, so we are in very good hands as she takes us through this training today. Take it away, Joelle.
Thank you, Mel. Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm the product trainer here at FormAssembly, and as Mel mentioned, if you've attended a webinar in the past, you've probably seen my face at some point. One of my favorite parts of the job is literally coming in here, teaching all of our wonderful customers how to use FormAssembly to better their processes and just get what they need to get done. And I just love that. And I'm so excited to share what we've prepared for you for FormFest. I love the chance to get to just share and see all of what my coworkers are doing and come up with too. Like, it's one of my favorite things to go back later and watch the recordings. So
absolutely. All right, as we get started here, we have an idea about how many folks are actually using workflow right now, which is where a lot of these integration features are going to be highlighted throughout our conversation today. So take a moment if you don't mind. We just put a poll up on the window, in the window. You know, are you currently using FormAssembly Workflow? We have a couple options. Yes, often, sometimes we're not sure how to get the most out of it. Maybe you've tried it, but you just kind of weren't seeing it based on your old work styles. Or no, you haven't really used it at all or found a place where you see the potential of needing to use them. From my experience, I have an idea of where this is going to land. Joelle, how about you? What are you thinking?
I'm thinking it's going to be sometimes, just because a lot of times it is such a useful thing, but it just is very different from our forms. And so sometimes it just takes a little bit of like, oh, look at that, and that inspiration to really get using workflow. So I'm curious of what all our attendees here today have said.
Yeah, well, that's a good word, inspiration. Hopefully that's what we provide some folks today, right? To dig in and see things. So let's see, where are we right now? Oh, wow, that is actually way more even than I would have anticipated. So, okay, all right, so that's great. So we have a couple of different places to talk across. We got a couple, I mean, wow, like 30% almost all the way through. Yes, often, sometimes, and no, not quite yet. So this is great. Okay, this is wonderful. We'll hit a couple of different things that I think each group is really going to see and find useful. So very cool. Interesting. I really didn't expect such an even split.
I
So let's
didn't
talk
either,
about what we are going
honestly.
to yeah. Shows you never know. You never know. You customers are always surprising us in the best way. So there we go. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about what are workflow connectors, right? We see that there's almost 30%, a little bit more, haven't used them at all. You haven't used really workflow. So I'm glad we're taking a little bit of time to just touch on that really quickly. And I'm just going to go ahead and answer Lisa's question because it's really relevant here. This session is about the new workflow. This is not legacy workflow. This is really going to be geared more to the newer workflow that you've seen. So we're going to be focusing on those connectors because those connectors are very different from the form connectors, which is what we'll dive into next. Then we're going to look specifically at some of the features that really make these connectors so different, which is really what drives a lot of the advanced integration that you're able to do. And that covers our preconditions, which we're going to learn a little bit more about, our dependencies, as well as our return variables, which are all very different and specific to our new workflows. We're going to look at how it all comes together. And then, of course, we're going to talk about any questions at the end. So I see questions starting to come in. Please be sure and add them there as we talk so we have stuff to talk about. All right. Let's see. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of turn it over to our master trainer, Joelle. Take it away, Joelle. Why don't you tell us a little bit about workflow connectors?
Yes, thank you. So since we're all kind of even across the board, I just want to make sure that we're all getting on the same page. First, it is going to be our new FormAssembly workflow that is going to be available on our Essentials and above, or Teams plans and above, and our Atlas Explorer plans and above. So many plans to try to keep track of now, but those are going to be the plans that are going to have access to workflow. And with those workflows, we have our new workflow connectors. And so at a high level, our workflow connectors are going to be the next evolution of FormAssembly connectors. And they're designed specifically for workflows. And what makes them really powerful is that they bring everything together into one place instead of managing setup and logic and data flow separately and trying to really get everything working as you need it. Workflow connectors let you see and control all of that in one streamlined experience. So rather than just sending data from point A to point B, you're actually designing how and when that data moves through your process all within the same interface. And it gives you a lot more visibility and control over what's happening behind the scenes with your data. So how is this any different? Like, how are the workflow connectors different from the form connectors you might be used to, and how do they provide everything that I just said? So the biggest shift is in how things are structured. So with form connectors, you're working with steps, and it's a bit more rigid, and your logic options are fairly limited. With workflow connectors, those steps are replaced with actions, and each action is fully configurable. That means that within each action, you control exactly how that data is sent to your integration, and you can layer in logic directly where it matters most. And this is where features like the preconditions, dependencies, and return variables really come into play. They allow you to customize not just what happens, but when it happens and what happens next. And one more big improvement with workflow connectors that I really want to highlight is going to be that error handling tab. And this gives you control over what happens if something goes wrong. For example, or like if you have an error or something. So for example, you can show a custom message to a respondent if they encounter an error with your integration, or instead of showing a message, you can route it to a different step in your workflow, or send an email notification, or really take any action with any of the connector steps that you want to take if something does happen with your integration. So instead of errors being a dead end, you can actually design how your workflow responds to them. So overall, workflow connectors are much more flexible, and they allow you more control to build your integrations and your data journey. So let's take a look at how everything kind of works in a real example. We're just going to look at a high level overview where we'll circle back to this. So we're going to look later at a leadership program application where these students can apply. And as they're applying, there's a few things that I need to handle in the back end. And rather than doing it manually, I can set up my workflow to do all of this automatically. And some of those things I need to do is, some conditions automatically disqualify students from this leadership program. And also, I want to create different records based on their responses. To make that happen, I can use preconditions, dependencies, and return variables to handle all of that processing for me, so I'm not having to go back later to manually do all of that. But before we go and dive into this use case where we're seeing everything working together, let's take a step back and break each of these features down individually. So the first one we're going to talk about is going to be preconditions. And preconditions let you control whether a connector action runs or it gets skipped based on conditions that you define in the action. Previously, this required writing formulas. Now you can just set the conditions directly in the action. And with preconditions, you can run different actions based on form selections, only create or update records if certain criteria are met, and so many other things. But give me just a moment to share my screen and we can really kind of see what those preconditions look like in your workflows. So if you haven't used our new workflow feature, this is going to be what it's looked like. And I've got my Salesforce workflow connector. And here in my workflow connector, I've got this action to create a volunteer record. And to this action, I've added a precondition. And I'm just going to go ahead and add another condition. And with these conditions, you can use either a form field, a value or formula, or a variable. And with each of these, you're going to have operators where you can really say, okay, great, I want this to be done. I want that to be equal this. And one of my favorite is going to be this is blank or is not blank. So rather than having to try to map that, I can just be like, hey, if this field is blank, I do not want this action to run, which I think is a really great use of these preconditions and really highlight the fact that you don't have to write the formulas. You can just state directly here whether you want this, when you want this action to run, you can state that directly here in this precondition. So I'm going to remove that and kind of taking a look at this. This volunteer record, I only want it to create a volunteer record if the how would you like to help field in my form, the respondent has selected I want to volunteer. And so if any other applications or this community outreach form is submitted and this option is not selected, this action won't run. So I'm only creating those volunteer records for the specific volunteers. Now let's go into a little bit more of a complex precondition. And for this one, I've got a submit request workflow. And with this one, I have multiple requests that they can submit through this one workflow. So here, I want to create different tickets based off of what they've selected in the form. So for my HubSpot, I want it so that if the email is not blank, I want this action to run. So it won't run if the email is blank. And then also, I've added 2 more conditions for the request type of being either support or general questions. And I've used that custom logic to ensure that this action will only run when the email is not blank and either support or general questions is selected and none of the other options. That way, I can customize which actions are running for which request types are being selected in the form. And is especially useful for those times when you might have multiple things going on in your forms and you only want to trigger certain actions for certain entries. And so with preconditions, you're controlling exactly when that data gets sent instead of sending everything every time. Now, Mel, I know you have seen so many uses of preconditions with these court cases. So I'm kind of curious of like what you've seen customers using and seeing.
Right. Well, I think one thing we're seeing sometimes, especially as people run from forms to workflow, is the expectation of change a little bit. So anybody who's used the Salesforce connector knows all about skip ifs, right? Whether we want to or not, we're very familiar with them. But with the new preconditions, it's a little more streamlined and a little more intuitive, I think. So we've seen some confusion as people move over because they're expecting a little bit of a skip if mentality as opposed to a run when true mentality. So just throwing that out there, but I think it's actually a much better way to think it through. So people definitely love that. Another place that we're seeing some real success with, I will say, is with that subscription billing logic, right? You have some people you want to do annual payments for, monthly payments for, quarterly payments for. With the new preconditions, you're really setting up so that you only have kind of one interval type running by execution, which just clears things out and makes it so much easier to understand. It really cleans up some of those questions that we tend to get when people are using form versus workflow. So that's been a really big win for us. And then, of course, you touched on it a little bit already, but it really helps with that elegant error failure because you don't need to do it, right? You're setting the precondition to only run if something happens. And you're able to divert people a completely different way if they shouldn't be getting that error. So you're not running into quite as many errors because of that, which who loves an error? Nobody. So that's been really helpful as well, and something that we've seen some real success in as people make that transition.
Perfect. Yeah, I love to see what our customers are actually doing and also knowing the errors that they've run into, because I know even with my own testing, sometimes I run into things and I'm like, wait, what's going on? So it's always nice to see what's going on. And then that also allows us to come in and help you guys out a little bit more. But let's kind of move into next, the dependencies. So with dependencies, they allow you to define whether one action depends on another. So if a first action doesn't run or gets skipped because of preconditions or something, the dependent action won't run either. And this allows you to ensure that your workflow actions only run when the actions they rely on have also run. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into my screen share so that we can take another look at dependencies. So I'm jumping back into kind of that first one that we've seen, and that's going to be our community outreach workflow. And here, we saw that the volunteer record has that dependency, but if I am creating a volunteer record, I do also need a driver's license for that volunteer record. And so I have a upload driver's license that has a dependency on the create volunteer. And adding this dependency allows me to ensure that this action being dependent on the volunteer record is only ever going to upload a driver's license file to my Salesforce when a volunteer record has been created. And another example of dependencies is going to kind of circle back to that, kind of like Mel said with the payments and stuff, is here in this workflow, I have a conference registration, and as part of the registration, they can also choose to donate. And so with the registration, I do need to charge taxes on the registration, but I don't want to charge taxes on donation. So I can come down to this taxes on registration action, and I have a dependency on that total registration cost. And this allows me to ensure that if someone makes a donation, they are not getting charged taxes. And the only time someone is being charged taxes is when they are registering. And this allows me to keep my workflow steps aligned and making sure that each step is only running when it actually needs to and makes sense to for my workflow. And now I'm curious of like what you've seen of Mel with support and using dependencies.
I'll tell you, the place that dependencies come in great with support is getting rid of those orphaned records, right? This is a way that people really can. One thing we see with regular forms is the accidental orphaned records, right? Because something got created and it didn't get attached the way that you wanted it to. Dependencies clear that up. Dependencies say, hey, I'm only doing it if this, and so make them joined. So you're not worrying about any kind of cases out there not attached to accounts, or cases or tasks not attached to the right contact. things of that nature. So it really, really is helpful. The other big thing is it's really helpful with the timing issue. I know sometimes we have a couple things running at once. You've got a Salesforce connector trying to do everything. We're running them asynchronously in the background. But with dependencies, you're not having to worry about it not catching. Sorry, apparently I'm a big hand user, but with the async form ones, you run the risk of them trying to happen at the same time, and therefore the second one not really connecting to the first. But with dependencies, you're saying don't even bother, right, until that first one is created, and that's a huge help in that timing issue. And so you know that they're all getting connected the way that they need to be connected. So this is, just of course, really anytime you're using a parent-child object, anytime you're trying to create a task associated with an account, or anytime you're trying to create a case associated with a contact in particular, these have been game changers for folks and making sure they get set up the right way, connected the right way, and continue to run their process as expected. It also really kind of helps with some reconvening, right? So we're sending people down different paths, and we need them to meet back up. That's not a very elegant solution in the form to form, but with the workflows and with the way that we have dependencies, once X happens, whether it happens over here or over there, we're coming back to one place. So it's really allowing a lot of that joining up that we need to happen. So those are some of the big wins that we've seen with that, and some of the ways that people are typically using that to make their whole flow a lot easier.
Great. That I love the pointing out of like the parent-child and the relationships between records. These dependencies really allow those relationships to be front and center, so that you're making sure if a parent record doesn't get created, that child record is also not getting created. And like you said, that joining up is also very important. Now let's go ahead and talk about one of the things that in my opinion, is going to be where things are just getting so powerful, and that's going to be return variables. So return variables allow you to take data from one connector action and save it so you can reuse it later in your workflow. And instead of just sending data out from your workflow, you can actually capture important information and important values and pass them downstream in your workflow. This could be things like a newly created record ID, a file URL, a payment ID from a payment connector, or really any value returned by a connector to your workflow. And once that value is saved as a variable, you can map it into another connector later in the workflow, use it to make decisions in the workflow, display it to your respondents later, whatever you need to do. And one of the benefits of being able to use return variables is they also help you avoid relying on passing data through the URL to hidden fields, which is something that you needed to do with the forms previously to workflow. If you had to pass any data that you needed in a second form or a third form through the URL. And now with workflow and those return variables, that data can be queried and stored on the back end, which is more secure and less prone to human error or issues popping up because something didn't get passed over correctly in the URL. And I also want to take a moment and point out that return variables and everything we've talked about aren't just for Salesforce, which if you've attended previous webinars, you might have seen them used exclusively with Salesforce or with a different connector. These are available and can be used with any of our workflow connectors to pass data between integrations. And that is one of the things that I really love. And we can go ahead and take a look. Give me just a moment to share my screen, and we can see how.
Yeah, Christina, while she's sharing her screen, that answers your question specifically. These really can be used with any of the connectors, which is really important, not just Salesforce. So yes, any of those workflow connectors.
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Mel, for getting on top of that. Yeah. And we're actually going to see another connector working right here. And with this one, I have a association application, and as part of the application they can upload files, but I also want them to sign a generated document, and all of those documents I want to store in my Microsoft SharePoint account so that I don't clutter up my Salesforce later. So I'm going to go ahead and upload those e-signature docs, and with that I'm going to return the URL from SharePoint. So where that file is stored in SharePoint, I'll have the URL saved to this variable in my workflow. And then coming down, I have that file upload from the form that I'm pulling in and sending to my SharePoint. And I'm also going to pull the direct URL for those to a variable in my workflow that I can then take and send to my Salesforce. And here in my Salesforce connector, I'm creating an application record. And here in the description, if I open up the file, the formula editor, I can see I have those two variables, the sign doc and uploads that we just created in SharePoint that I'm going to send over to my Salesforce so I can make sure that those documents are still accessible by anyone that is accessing the record in Salesforce. But I'm not cluttering up my Salesforce with all of those extra documents that are getting uploaded to my SharePoint. And having that really clean, but still accessible. And then let's take another look at another way to use return variables. And that is going to be, you don't have to just send a value. You can reuse it later steps. So here I have a prefill connector that is running. And as part of the prefill connector, I am pulling the account ID from my Salesforce and saving it as a variable. And here with a variable, I can then come to my later Salesforce connector. And here, I can use that variable in a precondition and say, hey, run this action as long as that variable account ID is not blank. And this allows me to really state and customize those actions and simplify them. And I kind of use the terms variable and return variables interchangeably, and they really are. And if you don't know too much about variables, I do recommend checking out, a couple months ago, we did a Workflow Variables 101 webinar, checking that out to see other ways that you can use return variables and workflow variables. And this way, my workflows can start to really feel connected using those variables, because each step can build on not just the previous actions within the single connector, but other actions and other steps, and seeing how everything can be progressed. Now that we've kind of seen some of these working individually with a little taste into this. Oh, first though, I almost forgot. I do want to hear what, Mel, what you've seen with support with the return variables. I almost got ahead of myself.
I'm telling you, Joelle's used to handling this all by herself. She does not need much help. So I totally understand, Joelle. She is killing it. But I'm going to take this opportunity to answer your question, but also answer Anna's question, or Anna, I apologize for how we pronounce it. People don't realize that, you know, the return variables, or what they get really excited when they figure out, I would say, is that those variables, to your point, can be used in either form fields or workflows. So Anna was asking, like, can we use these to layer forms together? You know, use an intake form, and if they answer they have children, they send them to the children intake form. 1,000%, that is exactly, it is the exact use case, right? 100%, and we see examples of this every day. So I thought it was a great timely question, because you're really able to use those variables and make them do things you never could before. Think about all of those ugly pre-fill, you know, pre-fill links that you've had to do in the past. I mean, this solves that problem, right? Instead of layering them through redirect, you're just using your workflow starting at the top and working all the way down. You might have two completely different paths that you're going to send somebody on, but you're starting from one place and really using those return variables to take that information and send it down those different paths, so that nobody's having to repeat entry. None of us like having to type our name and address or whatever it might be 1,000 times within the same kind of setting. And a lot of these kinds of variables and return variables do that hard work for us. Another common place that people are really using this starts to come in, and I think you touched on it a little bit, was, you know, capturing that payment information for later use, for later proof, you know, using that, being able to really elegantly pull that into receipts, invoices, things of that nature, whenever they're running payments earlier in the process, and taking that and using it in really elegant ways that make it feel much more seamless and much more usable and friendly. So that's a huge way that we're seeing it. But Anna, to your point, 1,000% yes, this is how you lay your forms together, and this is how you get them to work really seamlessly, so you're not kind of running 1,000 different places.
Yes, yeah, that is a great thing to point out, Mel, for Anna's use case, and also for so many others. I've seen so many people that have just a very similar use case to Anna's using this. And also, I do kind of want to touch back on when you mentioned the payment confirmations. We do have those brand new Stripe and PayPal workflow connectors. I think there's another session on those payment workflow connectors. And there's even more return variables that we just don't have time to show today. There's so many things that we wish we could show, but there's limited time. And I do recommend checking that one out as well to see what all is updated with those payment workflow connectors. But specifically for us with those return variables is it provides more options that you can return from the payment connectors to use in your workflows. And I really just love the fact that those return variables allow you to connect through so many different things. So now let's go ahead and circle back to that first workflow that we saw with everything so that we can see everything working together. So give me just a second to share my screen for the next time.
And I'll do a little jump in again. I'm just trying to hit all these questions or thoughts as we can while Joelle shows her screen. But I just want to shout out Liz, who says, just as encouragement, workflows can be intimidating at first, but really elevates the value of the forms. That's exactly what we want to see, right? They look a little, intimidating when you first get started, but once you get the hang of it, you're going to be able to do so much more in such a shorter amount of time in a more elegant way. So thanks for that shout out, Liz. Really appreciate it.
Yes, I love that shout out, Liz. Thank you so much. They really can be intimidating, but with that intimidation, you can take something as like this is just a single form workflow with two connectors. And with the workflows, even something straightforward as this, I can take it and really make it work for me by using those preconditions. So let's round out what is going on here. So we've got that leadership program application where the students can submit the application. As part of the application, they upload a resume. And as part of all of the applications, I want every single resume to be uploaded to my Google Drive. So here, my Google Drive connector, I've got the action configured. Takes sometimes a minute to load when it goes through. But with this action, I am sending all of those resumes over to my Google Drive. And then sometimes it takes a little minute, probably because I have so many tabs open to show everything. Sometimes I get a little overzealous and have too many things open. Okay, well, we've kind of saw that a little earlier where here in this Google Drive, I have my action, I'm uploading the resume, and one of the return variables, I'm returning that URL to the Google resume variable so that then I can then go into my Salesforce connector. And here in my Salesforce connector, I've got it set up so that the first action is going to be looking up a student contact record. And if there's no record found, I'm skipping the action, but I'm also pre-filling the contact ID for the student to a variable. And then I can come to this final action here in the connector, and that's going to be create application record. And so for this create application record, the first thing I've got is going to be that dependency. So if no student contact record is found, it's not even going to run this step. It's not going to do anything. But if a student contact record is found, then I want this precondition to run. And this is where I can filter out and automatically disqualify the students who don't qualify for this leadership program. And those students are going to be the ones that I can only accept juniors who have a above 3.6 GPA or any seniors. So I'm able to come in here and set a precondition with custom logic of if they are a junior and above a 3.6 GPA or a senior, then run this action. So I have those two preconditions kind of set up here in one go. And with this, we're controlling when this action runs by making sure that they're a student and they meet those criteria. And then if we come down to the mapping, I am using that student contact variable that we mapped in the first action to the contact field here in the application. And I'm also using that Google resume URL that we found in the Google Drive connector to send to my Salesforce. And this ensures that everything's tying together and that only qualified applicants are creating those application records, and that all of my data is being connected across all of my systems and integrations, and avoiding any unnecessary actions or unnecessary record creation that I then later have to go into my Salesforce and manually remove those students that do not qualify. And so instead of just sending data through blindly, we're making decisions at each step based on conditions, dependencies, and values that I've already captured using my form. And that's just one of the ways that makes workflow connectors so powerful. And I really do just love seeing what our customers come up with. So really kind of the next thing I want to know is what kind of advanced integrations have sparked your interest, or what things do you see your team using and needing? Is it going to be those preconditions or dependencies or return variables? Mel, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I always joke that I'm a bit of a fangirl for the return variables because I just like the way they clean things up a lot for us, and being able to take things, through the whole process from start to finish. So that's where I would see people leaning, but each of them are, so incredibly useful. And obviously things like preconditions people need on a daily basis. So I don't know. How about you, Joelle?
Honestly, with this one, since it's the 3 points, I'm going to say probably the preconditions of the return variables, because honestly, actually, they might have an even split, split again, just because they all have such different needs and uses. But if I'm going to have to pick a favorite, I'm going to have to agree with you. The return variables are definitely my favorite way to use this, because I use them in so many different ways, just for the trainings, but also for like my own work. I use those return variables a lot. So I'm curious to see. I'll wait a few more seconds so we can get a couple more people coming in and put in their entries. I know it's always like, oh, pressure. What should I say?
Why don't you answer a quick question for us based off of your last example while we're waiting on just a few more responses here. But Mia had a good question, which is, you're going through the workflow, like in your example that you just had, somebody doesn't meet that 3.6 criteria. What does the user see when they don't meet that criteria? Does the form stop moving forward for them, and so they don't spend time on the rest, or or the workflow stop for them so they don't spend time on something they don't qualify for? How does that set up?
So for the example I used today, they would have just gotten sent to the thank you page, and they wouldn't have seen anything. But I can definitely set up as well a conditional step in my workflow where even before I ran the Salesforce connector, I could have filtered out and been like, okay, great. If they have below a 3.6, let's send them down this path to send them an email to say, hey, sorry, unfortunately at this time, you do not qualify for the leadership program. And that is so many different ways to use our workflows that you can really customize it. Like, you can use a conditional step, you can use those actions, you can use the workflow connectors, you can use approvals where you have someone that is on your team that goes through and manually checks them. So many different ways. And I've seen really creative ways of customers being like, okay, this is how I want to handle my situation.
Right.
I want to send them an email, or I want to direct them to a new form to be like, hey, you didn't qualify for that, but you might qualify for this one.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and take a look. I know what Caitlin voted for, though, because her question in the box is the idea of not having to use skip ifs anymore is a gift all on its own. So I love that kind of joy about a new feature. So that's awesome. Yeah, return variables. See, all right, I had it. Okay, all right, I agree. Yeah, I love them. I'm a big fan. Very cool.
Okay.
All right, well, let's start to wrap up just a tiny bit. We still got plenty of time, though. Keep those questions coming. But Joelle, you want to wrap up what we've seen so far?
Yes. Yeah, let's kind of, I know we've been throwing a lot of information at you, so I just wanted to quickly summarize everything so that you can take them and have a quick reference. So we talked about the workflow native connectors and how they are a more powerful, easy to use, and flexible thing that you can use on your workflows to really see what's going on with them. And then preconditions allow you to control when those actions run so that you're only sending data through to your integration when you need to. And then the dependencies, they control when that data is being sent based off of previous actions. So you're able to be like, okay, great, only send or only create this record if that record is being created, and giving you that control there. And then finally, those return variables that Mel and I both just love and allow you to save data from your connectors and just reuse it across your workflow, giving you that power. I really love that. And I know we've definitely talked about a lot of things, but I also want to hand it over to Mel to talk about what's available in workflow now and seeing some of those cool features and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, and I lost the name, but I think it'll also help answer some questions that I saw. So what we know, there's, changes. People, you don't want to change over to workflows until you know that it has everything that you've loved and used in Forms already. Totally understand. And we're working on continuing to get us to a path of parity so that, it's a pretty seamless experience and you don't lose anything you might have had or had spent a lot of time configuring in Forms. So what's available now that you might not know about, relatively new, especially if maybe you tried it a while back, is our CAS and our LDAP authentication. You can now use CAS and LDAP authentication to seamlessly integrate into the workflow steps. SAML is coming soon, and that is a question that I saw here in the questions. SAML is coming very, very soon. I can't unfortunately give any deadlines or ETAs, but I will just tell you if I was going to use very, very, it means it's coming very, very soon. So keep an eye out for that. We continue to want to work on that one. We know it's super important to a lot of us, a lot of integrations for security and authentication. So that's wonderful. We also have some enhanced collaborations now. Shared workflows are now showing up for both folks. It was limited to just the creator previously. Now, we've got these big fun workflows. Maybe you're handling part A of the workflow, somebody else is handling part B of the workflow, different areas of the org. You can now share those and make it easier to collaborate with your fellow teammates, colleagues, and both kind of hone in on your own individual areas, which is wonderful. Also, explore responses. This was one, this would be my heyday. This is the other place that I get really, really excited because, of course, if you're collecting data, sure, you may be using Google Docs or Sheets or something, or, somewhere else to send it, but you want to be able to get it out of FormAssembly itself. We're continuing to iterate on this. Right now, it is an export of up to 30 days worth of those completed responses via CSV. We're continuing to update on that and iterate on that. So expect to continue to see some updates and enhancements there soon. It's super important, and I'm really excited to see that out. So if that was stopping you previously, come on in and give it a try. And then, of course, enhanced spam protection. Oh, spammers. I don't know. There are no good words to describe how much we don't love spam and are doing everything we can to help you stop that spam from attacking your forms. So Alcha is a new privacy-focused, GDPR-compliant alternative that we have to Google reCAPTCHA, which is really just, you don't need to use the tracking user data, which gets in the way of using reCAPTCHA for a number of folks. And we are continuing to explore ways that we can stop that, especially with workflow, but everywhere, to be honest, anywhere that you're in FormAssembly, we want to help you. So we're continuing to work on that. So those are some of our new things, and we're continuing to release on that daily. So keep your eyes out, and we're happy to get you there.
Okay.
All right. Oh, me and Joelle, see, yeah, we fight for who's going to control the thing. All right, Joelle, boy, do we have some questions for you, friend. I'm going to start rattling them off to you. I'll try and answer the ones that I can quickly, but we have a number of questions here. And if we don't get to all of your questions, by all means, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Your questions with your email are coming to us. And so we're happy to reach out if we don't get to it specifically. All right, here we go. So there's a good question. So instead of skip ifs, it's do when, but can you still integrate negatives?
Yes, you can definitely integrate the negatives. You can do the is not blank that I showed, or is not equals to. There is so many different operators that you can use. Like for mine, it only popped up like 5 of them, but I think we have something like 10 different operators that you can now use with those preconditions to really say, okay, great. If this is going on or this is happening, don't run this. Or if this is happening, do run it. And really customize that when you want it to run or not run.
Awesome. Now, does this still require connectors on the form? This is where some of this is confusion. We're going to help you unpack a little bit here. Or do these replace all of the connectors that you previously had on a form?
These are going to be replacing the connectors on the form. And so we saw just a few of our workflow connectors, and I do know that we don't necessarily have all of the form connectors as the new workflow connectors, but we are working towards getting all of those form connectors translated over to our workflow connectors, and they will replace the form connectors as being in workflow to allow you to have all of the features and all of the control that you saw today with those new workflow connectors. And if you'd like to transfer over to them, they're always a good choice.
Awesome. This one, I'm going to try and say this one correctly, Joelle, so bear with me. But just to understand better, we can connect 2 connectors. Example, I fill in a form or use a webhook, and then it goes to a connector like Google Sheets. Then can we, in FormAssembly, use that information to put it in Salesforce? Is that right?
I think I understand. So, okay. So I would say that with the Google Sheets, you're going to have the return variables. And so that's going to be a little bit more limited in what you can return. So like with the Google Drive and the SharePoint, you can only return the ID of like the Microsoft assigned ID of the file or the URL. So those ones are going to be a little bit more strict, but with like the HubSpot or the Salesforce, you can make anything returned from them a variable using the lookups. But definitely if you are using like the Google Sheet and you want to return like the link to the Google Sheet or something, you can do that. But it won't be like, oh, great, I have this Google Sheet. Let me send everything in the Google Sheet to Salesforce.
Awesome. All right, let's see. Okay. This is from Matt. For a registration form where multiple people are being registered for an event via a repeating section, can workflows send a unique email confirmation to each of those attendees? And if so, can it reference a unique ID, like the attendee ID, to construct a different pre-fill URL link in each attendee's email? Like click this URL to update your registration. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Let me know if you need me to repeat it.
That is a lot. Okay. So I think this one might be a little bit more better suited to like trying to help out so that we can see the exact situation with your workflow and everything through support. But I'm going to try to summarize a little bit.
You'll take it question by question, so to speak?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So can workflow send a unique email confirmation to each attendee?
So it not for each email. So like the email stuff is going to be just like the one. So like it could send like an email to one person, but it won't be able to be like, okay, great, like there's 10 people here. And so we're going to send out 10 different emails. It can be like, okay, here's the one email step. And then it puts in the 10 different emails, but it won't be kind of like what you're thinking, where it's a different email for those 10 attendees.
But you can use your variables or other information to customize it to include, you know, their names, to kind of craft those URL links that you're probably looking to craft in each of those, and it would be separate for each person, correct? I mean, it's one step, but when that person gets it, it's going to be, yeah.
Yeah, it would require some finagling to get it to work as you're expecting. But that's kind of where I'm like hesitating of like, it's a little bit too specific to be able to give you like, yes, here's how to do it. it would require some specific setup to get it to work, especially how you want it to for your use case.
Perfect. And this is a great question, Kimberly. What's the best resource to support building more complex workflows?
Oh, that one is hard. So there is not like one way fits all. Um, Honestly, there are just going to be. Can you repeat the question just so that I can make sure that I am?
Yeah, it's just what is the best resource to support building more complex workflows? Which we'll be sharing some resources at the end of this presentation for sure, so that you'll have links to all of our resources. And maybe at that point, Joelle, you can point out which ones you think will be for the more advanced user, like the folks that we have here today.
Yes, yeah. I would say it's a little hard to say like the specific resources because all of our resources are really good and they're very specific to what you're needing to do and wanting to use. Like if you just want a good like general complex one, I would say it's not in our resource center, but the watching the webinars usually give a good idea of like what types of workflows you can do if you're like not sure where to start with those complex ones. But there's not one because they're very kind of like, here's how to do this and here's how to do that. But definitely there's so many things to do and you can integrate. And I do love workflow and that is easy to use and build out those complex ones.
Absolutely. And I apologize, guys. I know I feel like I'm flying through this, but we have lots of great questions. Again, I know we're not going to get to all of them, but we'll make sure to follow up for those of you that we don't get to their question. Chris asks a question, though, that I think hits a lot of people in different ways. Now, his specific use case is because he's with a school, but we see this issue frequently, or this type of question. You know, we want to ensure that the names from submissions don't override what we already have in Salesforce, right? Can a workflow help evaluate if a person is already an applicant or student based on a field in Salesforce, and then prevent that name from being overwritten?
Yes, absolutely. You can do that through like the lookups. If like they're putting in their email or student ID, you can find their record using that and then be like, okay, great. I'm just not even going to map the first name and last name. So I don't have any chances of that overwriting. That is just one of the ways that you can do that. And it is absolutely possible to make sure that the data that your student enters is not overwriting your Salesforce data.
Absolutely. All right, we have one. Is it best to use the Stripe connector on the form or on the workflow?
Honestly, it depends on your use case. I really love our new Stripe workflow connector and that it gives you a lot more freedom and capability to have a lot of those integration logics that we touched on working for you. So you're not having to write a lot of formulas for like the different items of like, okay, great, like this item, if it's this and this and that and this, writing a complex formula for all of those, you can really use the logic that we showed today to simplify that. And really, I know it's a little biased, but I do like the workflow connector because it is just so straightforward and easy to use because you're really saying, okay, great, here's this one-time charge. Here is the items that I want to charge for it, and being very clear, allowing you to be very clear of what is happening in the connector.
Yeah, and I do think just from a support perspective, I will say, while I don't necessarily have an opinion, I think I lean with Joelle. I prefer them in the workflow. I think they're more useful and can be a little more thoughtful there. I do encourage, once you start moving in that direction, that you do move them, right? Like keep your connectors kind of in one place versus the other, because we do see confusion pop up when you have things happening in a workflow or in a form, and then some's happening in the workflow and then some's happening in the form. I think it just gets hard to understand. And especially if you are a collaborator in any way, shape, or form, keeping it kind of clearly in one place, which the workflow is very, the workflow UI makes it very visible and very obvious at a glance where things are living, it helps out a little bit. So that would be my 2 cents. We had a question, which I think is totally valid, and it hits on some other questions. Bev had asked about like when we have an error in workflow, I need the ability to reprocess. Is this in scope, and what is the timeline for this?
Yes. Okay. So it's not going to be reprocess. What you'll do is go to the response that you need to reprocess or had an error. You'll open it up, and then you can actually press replay on the specific step you need to replay. So then that way it'll send the response. Like if it's a connector that you need to had an error and you need to have it go through the connector again, you can click replay and it'll replay that response through the connector and send that data back through. And that's going to be kind of the new version of, instead of reprocessing, you're replaying steps in your workflow. But yeah.
There's a little bit some questions about, and I'm gonna cut us off here soon, but I promise if you asked a question and we didn't get to it, I will follow up with you to let you know and at least point you in the right direction or the right resource to answer that question. Joelle, could you answer really quickly, if somebody is in their account, they have no idea what account they have, how do they know if they have workflows available? And just to clarify, if you have workflow available, you absolutely have access to all of these things we mentioned today. There was questions about whether or not you have it, but this automatically, these preconditions, dependencies, and prefill variables, return variables are all part of the workflow setup. So if you have access to workflow, then you have access to all of these. So Joelle, what's the quickest way for somebody to know whether or not they currently have access to workflow?
Yes, so the quickest way is, you'll see like we do have the classic workflow, or our legacy workflow. So looking on the left side is not going to be the way to see if you have access to the new workflow that we did today. What you're going to do is up at the top where your username is, click on that and then account, and it should show you the account details and what plan you're on and everything there. So that then if you are on the classic team, enterprise, or government cloud, you're going to have access to workflow. Or if you are on the Atlas, Explorer, or Team, Enterprise, Government, you're going to have access to workflow and you'll be able to start building workflows right away.
Perfect. And as we wrap up, because I know folks probably want to run to the restroom before your next session or grab a glass of water. If you are watching and you would like to see a demo or talk about account upgrade options for any of the, to get access to all of these things that you haven't seen yet, please just check that, yes, you want a demo, in which case our sales team will get in touch. If you have questions about your account options, we'll be in touch with, details. And then of course, C, no thanks. Either you're already using it, love it, as some of our folks are, or just don't really see it for you right now, you can hit no thanks. But hopefully after today, you have seen the numerous ways that this would be really helpful for you. And before we end, I just want to, I'm not even going to wait. I'm going to go ahead and click on over to our resources, because we want to make sure, remember, we have a resource panel somewhere, wherever you moved it on your screen. There's a resource panel available that'll show you how to get information about our native connectors, help documents, our workflow connector help documents. You'll see the workflow training, workflow variables training, and all about return variables. And of course, our resources are there, guys. We'd love for you to use them. Joelle is part of our knowledge and training team who create all of these wonderful resources that I know Support leans on and that we share with our customers daily. I just want to thank you all. So many questions, so much going on in the chat. I really appreciate your interaction with us, your feedback. We'll be back in touch with answers. Thank you for joining us today. Huge thank you, Joelle, for really driving the bus on this one. Thank you for all that you contribute to our team and our company. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Mel, for being a great co-host. And thank you to all of you who were able to join us. And we'll be excited to see you guys in some of our later sessions. So thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.